Hello there, and welcome to Deep Sleep Seas. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe your day has been long and restless, or perhaps you're someone who drifts best to the gentle rhythm of ocean stories rather than counting endless sheep. Either way, this journey is crafted especially for you. You have nothing to do now but rest. Let your shoulders soften, your breathing slow, and your mind begin its gentle float into calm. Because tonight we're not diving into trenches or exploring shipwrecks. Instead, we're drifting with some of the ocean's smallest travelers, creatures so tiny you could hold dozens in your palm, yet so abundant they shape entire ecosystems. We're following the krill, those translucent drifters that paint the southern seas pink and feed the giants of the deep. Over the next hour and more, we'll explore their hidden world. You'll hear of swarms visible from space, of bioluminescent flashes in the midnight zone, of baby krill climbing from depths measured in kilometers, and of feeding frenzies that sustain whales the size of buses. You'll discover how these thumb-sized crustaceans store carbon like underwater forests, how they survive months of winter darkness, and how they coordinate movements in clouds billions strong. Some of what you hear might surprise you. Much of it will simply wash over you like waves on a quiet shore. And that's exactly as it should be. So settle deeper now, let the world fall away, and let's begin our gentle journey with the krill. Krill are small, remarkably, impossibly small when you consider what they accomplish. An adult Antarctic krill measures about 6 centimeters from its head to the tip of its tail, roughly the length of your thumb, or a bit larger than a paperclip. That's the giant among krill. Some tropical species measure less than a single centimeter, barely visible specks drifting in warm currents far from polar ice. They are crustaceans, relatives of shrimp and lobster and crab, but built for a life of constant motion through open water rather than walking along the seafloor. Their bodies are compressed side to side, streamlined for swimming, with a hard exoskeleton that must be shed and regrown as they mature. Look closely at a krill, and you see through it. The shell is transparent in places, revealing the green glow of its digestive system, often visible through the translucent armor as a bright jade tube running the length of its body. This green comes from the phytoplankton it eats, the microscopic plants that fill Antarctic waters each summer when sunlight returns. The intensity of this green varies with feeding success. A well-fed krill glows bright emerald, its gut packed with diatoms and dinoflagellates. A hungry krill appears pale, almost ghostly, the digestive tract visible but empty, a hollow tube waiting to be filled. Krill have large black eyes, compound like an insect's, positioned on stalks that jut from either side of the head, giving them a wide field of vision to watch for predators approaching from above or below. These compound eyes contain thousands of individual light-sensing units called ommatidia, each one capturing a tiny portion of the visual field. The overall image assembled from these fragments is likely quite different from what vertebrate eyes perceive, perhaps more suited to detecting motion than resolving fine detail, more sensitive to changes in light level than to color or shape. The eyes can move independently on their stalks, scanning different directions simultaneously, a useful adaptation for an animal surrounded by potential threats. They have long antennae that sweep through the water, sensing chemical signals, detecting the presence of food or danger or others of their kind. These antennae are covered in chemoreceptors, specialized cells that bind to molecules dissolved in seawater and trigger neural responses. A krill can detect phytoplankton blooms from hundreds of meters away by sensing the chemical signatures those blooms produce, organic compounds released by the plants as they grow and photosynthesize. It can detect predator scents, the amino acids and other molecules that fish and seals release into the water as they swim and hunt. It can probably detect pheromones from other krill, chemical signals that convey information about reproductive state or stress or danger. The antennae also serve as mechanoreceptors, sensing water currents and vibrations, the subtle pressure changes that indicate something large moving nearby, or the flow patterns created by other krill swimming in the swarm. Touch any krill antenna, and it reacts instantly, withdrawing the antenna and often initiating an escape response. The sensitivity so acute that even gentle contact triggers defensive behaviors. The body segments number clearly, each ring articulated so the krill can flex and twist with startling speed when necessary. Count them and you find 19 distinct segments, each one a marvel of biological engineering. The head and thorax fuse into a single unit called the cephalothorax, covered by a carapace that extends backward like a helmet protecting the front third of the body. This carapace is flexible despite its hardness, able to deform slightly under pressure without cracking, returning to shape when the pressure releases. 10 legs emerge from the thorax, the middle section of the body. These are not for walking, but for swimming and feeding. The front legs, called thoracopods, form an intricate basket of bristles so fine they can filter particles smaller than the width of a human hair. Each leg branches into two parts, an outer branch used for swimming and an inner branch bearing the filtering bristles. The bristles themselves, called setae, grow in precise patterns, rows and whorls of them creating overlapping barriers that trap food while allowing water to pass. The finest setae are just 1 micrometer in diameter, thinner than spider silk, yet strong enough to withstand the forces generated by constant filtering. When feeding, the krill paddles these legs in coordinated sweeps, creating currents that draw water through the filtering basket while pushing the krill forward through plankton-rich water. The coordination required is remarkable. All 6 pairs of thoracopods must beat in synchronized rhythm, each leg matching the phase and amplitude of its neighbors, the whole apparatus functioning as a unified pumping system. Disrupt that coordination and the filtering fails, water flowing around the basket rather than through it, food escaping uncaptured. Behind the thorax, the abdomen tapers to swimming appendages called pleopods that beat in rapid rhythm, and finally to a tail fan used for steering and for those explosive backward darts that give krill one of their few defenses. The pleopods, 5 pairs of them, beat at frequencies of several times per second, generating the thrust that propels the krill forward during routine swimming. The tail fan, consisting of a central piece called the telson flanked by 2 uropods, spreads wide when the krill swims slowly, providing stability. But when danger strikes, the krill snaps that tail fan forward beneath its body with tremendous force, the sudden contraction of abdominal muscles driving the animal backward at speeds that would be difficult to achieve any other way. They are delicate, fragile even. If you held one in your hand, it would feel impossibly light, almost weightless. An adult krill weighs just over 1 gram, about the same as a paperclip or a US dollar bill. Yet these fragile creatures live in water that hovers just above freezing, in storms that churn the Southern Ocean into mountains of gray water, in darkness that lasts for months. The winds around Antarctica are the strongest on Earth, westerlies that circle the continent in an unbroken belt, generating waves that can exceed 15 meters in height, walls of water that would snap a fishing boat in half. The surface waters toss and churn, mixing violently, and any krill caught near the surface during a winter storm is subjected to forces that seem impossible to survive. But they do survive, they endure, they thrive, and there are so many of them that their collective weight rivals that of any animal on Earth. This combination of individual fragility and collective dominance is one of the great paradoxes of krill ecology. A single krill amounts to almost nothing, a mote of life that could be crushed between your fingers without effort. But billions of krill together constitute a biomass so large it influences ocean chemistry, carbon cycles, and the survival of animals weighing hundreds of tons. The exoskeleton that makes krill somewhat rigid also makes them vulnerable to damage. Unlike fish with their flexible scales, krill must shed their shells to grow. This molting process leaves them temporarily soft, vulnerable, the new exoskeleton not yet hardened into protective armor. During these soft periods, which last only hours but recur every few weeks in summer, krill are easy prey for any predator quick enough to catch them. They hide during molts when possible, descending to depth or tucking into ice crevices, waiting for the new shell to harden before resuming normal activity. Yet this same rigid exoskeleton allows krill to maintain body shape in turbulent water, to resist crushing pressures as they descend to depth, to provide anchoring points for the powerful muscles that drive their swimming. The shell is thinner than you might expect, mere fractions of a millimeter in most places, translucent enough to see internal organs through it, yet structured with ridges and reinforcements that give it surprising strength. It's a compromise, as all biological structures are compromises, balancing protection against weight, against flexibility, against the energy cost of producing and maintaining the shell. Krill exist in every ocean. 86 species have been identified so far, scattered from the Arctic to the Antarctic, from shallow coastal waters to the open Pacific, from the warm Indian Ocean to the cold Norwegian Sea. Each species has adapted to its own particular slice of ocean, its own temperature range and food source and set of predators. In the North Atlantic, the northern krill, Meganictiphonys norvegica, dominates, forming swarms in the waters around Norway and Iceland and Greenland. In the Pacific, Eupausia pacifica fills a similar role, drifting with currents from California to Japan, feeding countless fish and seabirds. Tropical waters hold their own species, smaller and less abundant, but still vital threads in the ocean's web. But when people speak of krill, they usually mean one species above all others, Eupausia superba. Antarctic krill, the giant of its kind, the keystone of the Southern Ocean, the pink tide that feeds an entire ecosystem. These are the krill that concern us most tonight, the ones that paint the coldest waters with life, the ones whose story encompasses so much of what makes krill remarkable. Antarctic krill live only in the Southern Ocean, that vast ring of water encircling Antarctica. They range from the ice-choked coast all the way north to the Antarctic convergence, an invisible boundary near 55 degrees south latitude where cold water diving beneath warmer subtropical currents. This territory spans 32 million square kilometers, an area 65 times larger than the North Sea. In winter, more than 3/4 of this expanse freezes over, locking the surface into a jigsaw of ice flows and pressure ridges and lead channels where seals surface to breathe. In summer, 24 million square kilometers melt free and phytoplankton bloom in waters suddenly flooded with continuous daylight, creating a feast that krill evolved specifically to exploit. The abundance of Antarctic krill defies easy comprehension. Scientists estimate the total population at somewhere between 300 and 400 million metric tons of living biomass. Another way to state this, there are somewhere between 300 trillion and 400 trillion individual krill swimming in Antarctic waters at any given moment. More krill than there are stars in the Milky Way. More individual animals than can be meaningfully grasped. If you gathered all Antarctic krill together, their combined weight would exceed that of all humans on Earth. Some estimates suggest that krill, as a species, may represent the largest animal biomass on the planet, outweighing even ants or termites. They drift in currents that circle the continent. The Southern Ocean moves in vast gyres, the west wind drift carrying surface waters eastward around Antarctica, while the east wind drift runs counterclockwise near the coast. Between these opposing flows, massive eddies develop, spinning cells of water hundreds of kilometers across that trap and concentrate nutrients and plankton and krill. The krill swim with these currents, their individual movements too weak to resist the ocean's momentum, but their presence profound enough to shape what those currents carry. Each ocean sector tells a slightly different story. In the Atlantic sector, near the Antarctic Peninsula and the Scotia Sea, krill concentrate in extraordinary numbers, drawn by the richest phytoplankton blooms and the most favorable currents. This is where the majority of scientific research occurs, where commercial fishing vessels operate, where tourist ships bring visitors to witness breaching whales and penguin colonies, all supported by that underwater blizzard of krill. In the Indian Ocean sector, krill populations are patchier, less studied, spread across vast stretches of open water, with occasional concentrations near underwater ridges and the Antarctic coast. The Pacific sector sees similar patterns, with krill abundant in some areas and mysteriously scarce in others. But krill are not spread evenly like a thin layer of butter across toast. They aggregate, they gather, they form swarms. The life of a krill begins in summer, when Antarctica tilts toward the sun and daylight stretches across the entire 24-hour cycle. Female krill, mature and well-fed after the spring bloom, begin developing eggs inside their bodies. A single female can produce thousands of eggs in a season, anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 depending on her size and condition. She may spawn multiple times across several months, releasing batch after batch of eggs into the open water. The spawning act itself remains partly mysterious, observed only rarely in the wild and studied more often in research aquariums half a world away in Tasmania, where the Australian Antarctic Division maintains the only facility capable of keeping Antarctic krill alive through complete life cycles. Males pursue gravid females, sometimes several males competing for the attention of a single female heavy with eggs. The pursuit can last minutes, multiple males following a single female through the swarm, each trying to position himself for the crucial moment of spawning. One male eventually succeeds in positioning himself beside her, abdomen to abdomen. He possesses specialized structures called petasma, modified appendages on his first pair of swimming legs that can grasp and transfer packets of sperm. These structures look like small hooks or claspers, and during mating they extend and wrap around structures on the female called the tholicum, a three-lobed pocket on the underside of her thorax, designed specifically to receive and hold the sperm packets. The pair embrace, spinning briefly in the water, as the male flexes his body around the female's, forming a T-shape. The transfer takes only seconds, perhaps 5 at most, the male pumping sperm packets from his reproductive organs through channels in the petasma and depositing them in the female's tholicum. You can sometimes see these packets attached to females in the wild, small white vesicles clinging to the red tholicum, visible proof that mating has occurred. Then they part, swimming away from each other into the swarm, and the female carries those sperm packets attached to her underside until she's ready to release her eggs, sometimes hours later, sometimes days. When the time comes, when internal signals indicate conditions are right, she releases them in a cloud, thousands of tiny spheres each about 0.5 millimeter across, barely visible to the human eye, smaller than a grain of sand. The eggs emerge from openings near her tail, expelled in batches that spread around her like mist. Each egg is slightly denser than seawater due to its yolk content, that stored energy that will fuel the developing embryo through its transformation. And because they're denser, they sink immediately, falling away from the sunlit surface down into the cold, dark depths. Watch those eggs descend, and you witness one of the ocean's remarkable adaptations. They don't plummet rapidly like stones. They sink slowly, gracefully almost, at rates of perhaps 1 to 200 meters per day depending on water density and temperature. This slow descent is important. It takes time for development to proceed, for cells to divide and organize and differentiate into the structures that will become a functioning larva. If eggs sank too fast, they would reach the deep sea floor before development completed, settling into sediment where no food exists and where the hatch rate would likely be 0. If they didn't sink at all, staying at the surface, they would be easy prey for the countless surface-dwelling organisms that feed on plankton eggs, small fish and jellyfish and other krill and copepods. This sinking is not a mistake or an unfortunate consequence of egg density. It's a strategy honed over millions of years, a life history adaptation that separates eggs from surface predators while ensuring they don't descend too far before hatching. The eggs are programmed, in a sense through their size and density and developmental rate, to hatch at approximately the depth where they're most likely to survive. Natural selection has fine-tuned this system over countless generations, individuals whose eggs sank to the right depth, leaving more offspring than those whose eggs sank too fast or too slow or not at all. The descent continues for days, 7 days, 10 days, sometimes longer, through layers where light fades from bright to dim to dark, through temperature gradients where water grows progressively colder, through pressure increases that squeeze and compress everything as weight of water above multiplies. And inside each tiny sphere, cells divide, structures form. A nauplius larva develops, the first stage of krill life, a creature so simple and so different from the adult that early scientists classified them as separate animals entirely, believing they'd discovered new species, when in reality they were looking at krill children. The nauplius that eventually emerges is almost unrecognizable as a krill. It's a simple oval body, barely 1/4 millimeter long, with just 3 pairs of appendages and a single eye spot that can detect light and dark, but forms no images. It has no mouth yet, no feeding structures, no digestive system. It survives on yolk reserves remaining from the egg, metabolizing that stored energy to fuel its growth and the early stages of development. The clock is now ticking. Those reserves will last perhaps a few days, maybe a week if development proceeds slowly in cold temperatures. The nauplius must reach food before the reserves run out, or it will starve. And food only exists at the surface. This sinking is not a mistake. It's a strategy honed over millions of years. The eggs descend through the water column, through layers where light fades and pressure builds, down past 200 meters, past 500. Sometimes down to 1,000 meters or more depending on where they were spawned and how deep the seafloor lies beneath them. This descent takes 7 to 10 days, a slow drift through darkness while inside each tiny sphere a life begins its transformation. Inside the egg, cells divide, structures form, a nauplius larva develops. The first stage of krill life, a creature so simple and so different from the adult that early scientists classified them as separate animals entirely. The Nauplius hatches in the darkness of the deep ocean, emerging from its egg case as a tiny oval body with 3 pairs of appendages and a single black eye. It's translucent, nearly invisible even if you could somehow be there in that cold, dark depth to see it. And then it begins to swim upward. This is one of the great journeys in the ocean, as remarkable in its way as the salmon's return to spawning grounds or the eel's migration across the Atlantic. The Nauplius, barely a quarter millimeter long, must swim from depths of hundreds or even 1,000 meters back to the sunlit surface where food exists. It has no eyes yet beyond that single photoreceptor, no ability to sense light gradients or determine which direction is up based on vision. It can't see the surface glowing above. It relies instead on other cues, perhaps sensing pressure changes, perhaps responding to gravity, perhaps following chemical gradients or temperature shifts so subtle they're almost impossible to measure. But somehow, instinctively, driven by programming embedded in its nervous system through millions of years of evolution, it swims up. Tiny appendages beat in coordinated rhythm, pulling the minute body through water that resists its motion, viscosity at these small scales, making swimming feel like pushing through honey. Every movement costs energy, draws down those precious yolk reserves, brings the larva closer to starvation. There is no food down here in the twilight zone, the mesopelagic realm where organic particles are scarce, and what few nutrients exist have already been scavenged by specialists adapted to these depths. The Nauplius climbs, a few meters per day perhaps, moving upward through a water column that extends hundreds of meters above. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Imagine being the size of a grain of sand and needing to climb from the bottom of a skyscraper to the roof, with no elevator, no stairs, just your own tiny swimming efforts. Now imagine doing it while underwater, while cold, while running out of food, while your body is simultaneously transforming, growing new body parts and shedding old ones through a series of molts that pause the upward journey briefly each time. For larvae that hatch over the Antarctic continental shelf, where the seafloor lies 300 to 400 meters down, the journey is difficult but achievable. Many will make it. The distance, while enormous relative to body size, is manageable within the time constraints of yolk reserves. These larvae have a fighting chance, and enough of them succeed, that shelves are often good nursery habitat for krill, areas where juveniles concentrate and grow before dispersing into open ocean as adults. But larvae that hatch in deeper water, over abyssal plains, where the ocean floor lies 500 meters down or more, sometimes 1,000 meters or deeper, face a terrible lottery. The journey is simply too far. Most will exhaust their stored energy before reaching food, their swimming slowing and then stopping, their tiny bodies sinking back into darkness to become part of the marine snow drifting down to feed bottom-dwelling creatures. They die having never fed, never seen light, never had a chance at life. Birth location matters immensely. The accident of where a female released her eggs, whether over shallow shelf or deep plain, determines whether her offspring have any chance at all. This creates a spatial pattern in recruitment, the addition of new juveniles to the population. Areas with extensive shallow shelves, like the Scotia Sea, or regions around the Antarctic Peninsula, where undersea plateaus rise to within a few hundred meters of the surface, tend to be larval hotspots, nursery grounds, where successful development is most likely. These are the places where future krill populations are born, where the next generation begins its life. Protect these areas and you protect krill recruitment. Disrupt them through fishing or climate change or any other disturbance, and you impact not just current populations but future ones, perhaps for years to come, given the multi-year lifespan of krill. Those that succeed, that make the climb to the zone where light penetrates, arrive transformed. The Nauplius has molted twice during its ascent, shedding its exoskeleton and emerging larger and more complex each time. Molting underwater without drowning, without losing body fluids, without getting attacked during the vulnerable soft period between shedding the old shell and hardening the new one. This alone is a remarkable feat. The old exoskeleton splits along predetermined seams, and the larva pulls itself free, leaving behind a perfect ghost of its former self that drifts away and sinks. The new exoskeleton underneath is soft at first, allowing the larva to expand slightly, growing into the extra space before the shell hardens. By the time it reaches the surface layers, the larva has progressed through the metanauplius stage, added more appendages and body segments, and enters what's called the calyptopus stage. It now has a more elongated body, more swimming appendages, and compound eyes that can detect light and shadow, and perhaps the first hints of form and motion. Most importantly, it has developed a mouth and feeding structures it can eat, finally, filtering tiny phytoplankton from the water using bristled appendages that sweep food toward its mouth in motions that foreshadow the sophisticated filtering basket it will possess as an adult. The first meal matters. A calyptopus larva emerging into rich waters, blooms of diatoms or dinoflagellates thick enough to make the water turbid, can begin feeding immediately, replacing depleted energy stores, fueling continued growth and development. Success breeds success. Well-fed larvae grow quickly, molting frequently, advancing through developmental stages on schedule, accumulating body mass that buffers them against later lean periods. But a calyptopus emerging into poor waters, sparse phytoplankton or the wrong species or blooms that have already been grazed down by other zooplankton, this larva faces continued starvation. It may feed but not gain energy, metabolic costs exceeding intake. It weakens, growth slows, development stalls. Eventually, if conditions don't improve, it dies, sinking back down, another casualty of the brutal selection that winnows each generation. But it's winter now, or rather, approaching winter. The larvae that hatched in January or February reach the surface in late March or April, just as the Antarctic summer ends. Daylight begins to shorten, the continuous sun of summer giving way to nights that lengthen with each passing day until, by midwinter near the Antarctic Circle and southward, darkness lasts 24 hours. Phytoplankton blooms fade as light diminishes, the microscopic plants unable to photosynthesize without solar energy. The dense blooms that colored the water green-brown in summer thin and disperse. The surface waters cool further, approaching the freezing point of seawater, and ice begins to form. It starts as frazil ice, tiny crystals suspended in the water column, giving the ocean a thick, slushy appearance. These crystals cluster and coalesce, forming larger chunks that float to the surface and begin freezing together. Pancake ice forms, circular plates a few meters across, with raised rims where they've bumped and frozen against each other. The pancakes raft over one another, building thickness. Eventually they merge into continuous ice sheets that spread outward from the coast in an advancing front, the edge marked by a sharp boundary between open water and white ice. The ice advances relentlessly through autumn and winter, eventually covering more than 20 million square kilometers of ocean, nearly doubling the size of Antarctica's surface area. Some regions freeze solid, ice reaching meters in thickness through winter accumulation and pressure ridges where plates collide and buckle upward. Other regions maintain leads, channels of open water kept unfrozen by currents or winds, linear cracks in the ice sheet that offer access to air for seals and whales, but also exposure to brutal winds and sub-zero temperatures. For adult krill, winter means survival mode. Their metabolism slows, swimming becomes less frequent. They descend deeper during the day, conserving energy by reducing activity. They can shrink, reduce their body mass, burn their own tissues for fuel during the long dark months when food is scarce. An adult krill might enter winter at 60 mm length and emerge in spring at 55 mm, smaller but alive, having cannibalized its own muscle and fat to survive. They can endure starvation periods exceeding 200 days in laboratory studies, and who knows how long in the wild where occasional patches of food might appear unpredictably. But the larvae can't do this yet. They're too small, too simple. They lack the body mass to shrink from. They lack the physiological machinery to shut down metabolism to minimal levels. They're still growing, still developing, still transforming from simple calyptopus larvae into more complex fossilia and eventually into juveniles. This process requires energy. It cannot be paused indefinitely. They need food. They find it on the underside of the ice, in a habitat that most people never consider, an ecosystem existing in the narrow boundary between solid and liquid, between frozen and flowing. When seawater freezes, it doesn't form pure ice. The process excludes most salts, squeezing them out as water molecules lock into crystalline structure. This creates brine, super salty water that's denser than normal seawater and that sinks away from the freezing ice. But the exclusion isn't perfect. Pockets of brine remain trapped in the ice matrix, channels and bubbles and irregular voids where liquid persists. And in some of these brine pockets, especially those near the ice-water interface, algae can survive and even grow. These are ice algae, species of diatoms and other single-celled plants, adapted to cold, to low light, to the strange environment inside and beneath sea ice. They photosynthesize using whatever light penetrates the ice from above, even though that light is far weaker than summer levels, filtered through meters of ice and sometimes snow cover as well. They grow slowly, dividing at rates measured in weeks rather than days, but they grow, forming communities that eventually become visible as brown-green staining on the undersurface of ice flows. From below, looking up through clear water at the underside of ice, you would see this staining as irregular patches and streaks, darker areas where ice algae have colonized particularly favorable spots, perhaps where brine channels open to the ocean below, where nutrients can flow upward from deeper water. Some areas appear almost bare, white-gray ice with minimal growth. Other areas look like lawns, thick mats of algae covering square meters of underside, a green-brown felt that sways slightly in currents. This is where the larvae gather. They swim inverted beneath ice flows, orientated upside down relative to normal swimming position, maintaining station below the ice using their swimming legs. They have special adaptations for this foraging mode, rake-like setae at the tips of their thoracopods, tools specifically designed for scraping algae from surfaces. They graze the ice undersurface in zigzag patterns, swimming back and forth across productive patches, combing algae cells into their mouths, consuming the only food available in a winter ocean largely devoid of phytoplankton. This feeding strategy is so important that ice extent in winter correlates strongly with larval survival and recruitment success the following summer. Years with extensive ice cover, the ice forming early in autumn and persisting late into spring, tend to see good recruitment, large numbers of juveniles appearing in population surveys the next season. Years with limited ice, late formation or early breakup see poor recruitment, few juveniles, older age structures in the adult population. The correlation is strong enough that scientists use it to predict krill population trends, monitoring ice conditions through winter and spring to forecast whether the upcoming season will be a good year or a poor year for krill. The fossilia stage, which larvae reach by midwinter if they survive the calyptopis period, shows even more sophisticated grazing behaviors. These larger larvae, now several millimeters long with more body segments and more developed appendages, can scrape ice more efficiently. They can also capture small zooplankton, copepods, and other tiny crustaceans that also live in and around sea ice communities. They begin to look like miniature adults, with segmented bodies and filtering baskets and eye stalks, though they lack reproductive organs and haven't yet developed the full suite of behaviors that define adult krill. Through the winter months they continue developing, and when spring finally returns and ice begins to melt and daylight stretches longer each day, the fossilia metamorphose one final time into juveniles that look like miniature adults, complete with all body segments and swimming legs and the transparent shell that will define them for the rest of their lives. They're now 20 to 30 millimeters long, recognizably krill-shaped, capable of filtering phytoplankton from the water column and no longer dependent on ice algae. They join the adult populations, swimming in mixed swarms, feeding on the spring bloom that erupts as ice retreats and exposes vast areas of nutrient-rich water to continuous summer sunlight. From egg to juvenile takes at least a year, sometimes longer depending on food availability and water temperature. It's a journey fraught with danger at every stage. Eggs might be eaten by other zooplankton. Larvae might starve during the ascent. Juveniles might freeze if ice fails to form, or be eaten by fish or other krill or countless predators that patrol Antarctic waters. The survival rate is brutally low. Out of the thousands of eggs a female releases, perhaps only a handful will live to adulthood. But those that do survive enter a phase of life that can last 5 years, maybe 6 or 7, perhaps longer. Adult krill grow slowly but steadily in their first years, molting every few weeks in summer when food is abundant, less often in winter when metabolism slows. They retain this ability to molt throughout their lives, unusual for crustaceans, which typically stop molting once they reach adult size. Krill never truly stop. They can grow larger with each molt when conditions allow, expanding the exoskeleton incrementally over years. A particularly old and well-fed individual might reach 7 centimeters, heavy and successful. And more remarkable still, they can reverse the process. when food becomes scarce. When winter extends too long or spring arrives too late, krill can shrink. They molt into a smaller shell, reabsorbing body mass, essentially degrowing. The exoskeleton that was too small before is now a perfect fit. They emerge from the molt lighter, smaller, conserving energy by reducing the volume of tissue that needs fuel. This adaptation allows them to survive starvation periods of 200 days or more in laboratory settings. And who knows how long in the wild where patches of food might appear and disappear unpredictably. It's bizarre, counterintuitive. Animals are supposed to grow until they mature and then maintain their size. But krill have found another path, one that lets them flex their body size up and down in response to conditions, stretching lifespan across multiple seasons of feast and famine. In autumn, as food dwindles, adults actually begin losing their sexual characteristics. They revert, becoming similar to 2-year-old juveniles, giving no indication they were ever mature. Then in spring, when conditions improve, they develop reproductive organs again and spawn. They can toggle between adult and juvenile states, a biological trick that makes determining their age nearly impossible. Scientists estimate Antarctic krill live 5 to 10 years on average, but the uncertainty in that range reflects how difficult they are to age. There are no growth rings to count, no ear bones to examine. Size isn't reliable because of the shrinking. The best estimates come from mathematical models and long-term population studies, tracking cohorts of krill over multiple seasons and inferring age from patterns in the data. Some individuals might live longer than 10 years, others might perish in their first winter. The average is just a number floating in a sea of uncertainty. Each day in the life of a krill follows ancient rhythms, patterns set by light and darkness, and the biological needs shared by countless generations before them. Adult Antarctic krill are filter feeders, specialized to extract the smallest morsels of food from vast volumes of water. Their primary food is phytoplankton, microscopic single-celled algae that drift in the upper layers of the ocean where sunlight can penetrate. Diatoms especially, those glass-shelled jewels of the sea, tiny boxes and cylinders and chains of silica that bloom in enormous numbers when conditions align. A diatom cell measures perhaps 20 micrometers across, 20 thousandths of a millimeter, 6,000 times smaller than the krill that will eat it. This size difference is unusual in ocean food chains. Typically, it takes 3 or 4 steps to bridge such a gap. Phytoplankton are eaten by tiny copepods, which are eaten by larger copepods, which are eaten by small fish, which finally reach a size that krill-sized predators can consume. But Antarctic krill bypass all those intermediate steps. They feed directly on phytoplankton, those thumb-sized animals filtering microscopic plants from the water, a feat made possible by the exquisite precision of their filtering apparatus. The feeding basket forms from the thoracopods, those swimming legs that emerge from the middle section of the krill's body. 6 pairs of legs work in coordination, each one bearing rows of bristles called setae, that interlock to form a net with openings just 1 micrometer wide in the finest sections, small enough to trap even the tiniest diatoms while letting water flow through. To appreciate this scale, remember that a human hair is typically 50 to 100 micrometers in diameter. The finest filtering openings in a krill's basket are 50 times smaller than that, comparable to the wavelength of visible light, at the very edge of what's physically possible to filter using biological structures. The precision required to manufacture and maintain these filters is extraordinary. Each setter must be exactly the right length, positioned exactly the right distance from its neighbors, too far apart, and small diatoms escape through gaps, too close together, and water flow becomes restricted, making filtering inefficient and forcing the krill to work harder to pump the same volume of water. The spacing is not random but carefully controlled during development, each bristle growing according to genetic instructions refined over millions of years of evolution. When feeding, the krill holds its body at an angle and paddles these legs rhythmically, creating a current that draws water into the basket from ahead and pushes it out behind, while simultaneously propelling the animal forward. The angle matters. Hold the body wrong, and the current flows around the basket rather than through it. Hold it right and water streams through the filtering bristles, depositing trapped phytoplankton cells on the inner surfaces where they can be combed toward the mouth. The krill adjusts this angle constantly based on water density, swimming speed, and food concentration, optimizing filtering efficiency in real time. It swims through clouds of phytoplankton with the basket open, filtering continuously, combing the trapped cells toward its mouth with specialized bristles on the inner edges of the thoracopods. These combing bristles, shorter and differently structured than the filtering bristles, sweep along the filtering surface in regular strokes, gathering accumulated diatoms and directing them forward toward the mouth opening. The process is continuous: filter, comb, an endless cycle that allows krill to process enormous volumes of water without pausing. The diatoms, once captured and transferred to the mouth, enter a grinding chamber called the gastric mill, located in the foregut, just behind the mouth. This structure contains hard chitinous teeth, ridges and plates that move against each other with muscular action, crushing and grinding food particles. Diatoms have glass shells made of silica, beautiful but tough, transparent boxes and cylinders and chains that require significant force to break. The gastric mill applies that force, cracking the shells and exposing the soft cellular contents within. The broken fragments, shell shards mixed with the organic matter from inside the cells, pass into the midgut and digestive glands where enzymes break down proteins and carbohydrates and lipids, releasing nutrients that are absorbed into the krill's body. But the digestion is not complete. The glass shells, silica being chemically inert and not digestible, pass through unchanged. Organic matter that wasn't fully broken down by digestive enzymes also passes through. What remains continues through the gut to be expelled as fecal pellets, those carbon-rich packages that sink into the deep sea and that we'll return to later. The digestive efficiency of krill, measured as the percentage of consumed material that's actually absorbed, is perhaps 50 to 70% depending on food quality and feeding rate. That means 30 to 50% of everything a krill eats emerges in fecal pellets, still containing significant organic carbon and nutrients. This inefficiency is part of what makes krill such important contributors to carbon export. Krill can also scrape algae from the underside of sea ice, a skill learned in larval stages but retained into adulthood. They have special rows of rake-like bristles at the tips of their thoracopods, tools specifically adapted for this task. They swim inverted beneath ice floes, grazing the green-brown lawn in zigzag patterns, consuming ice algae that grow in the brine channels and on the ice-water interface. In winter, when phytoplankton is scarce, this ice algae can be the difference between survival and starvation. But krill are not strictly herbivorous. Given the opportunity, they'll eat copepods, small relatives a fraction of their size, that also drift in the plankton. They'll eat amphipods, other tiny crustaceans. They've even been observed eating each other in aquarium settings when other food is absent. Though whether this cannibalism occurs in the wild remains unclear, their digestive system is not particularly efficient. Much of what they consume passes through only partially digested, which is why their fecal pellets still contain significant amounts of carbon and organic matter. But efficiency matters less than volume. They feed constantly when food is available, swimming through rich patches of phytoplankton from dusk until dawn, because that's when they rise, at night. Vertical migration is one of the most widespread behaviors in the ocean, practiced by zooplankton and small fish and squid across every sea. As daylight fades, these creatures swim upward from the depths where they spent the day, ascending to surface waters to feed under cover of darkness. Before dawn, they descend again, returning to the safety of deeper, dimmer water where visual predators have more difficulty finding them. This daily rhythm moves so much biomass that it creates a false bottom on sonar displays, a scattered layer of echoes that rises and falls like a living elevator shaft through hundreds of meters of ocean. Antarctic krill participate in this migration, though their pattern varies by season and location and even age. Adult krill typically spend daylight hours at depths of 1 to 200 meters, below the layer where light is bright enough for predators to hunt efficiently by sight. As evening approaches and light levels fall, they begin swimming upward, timing their ascent so they reach the surface layers just as darkness settles over the sea. There they feed on phytoplankton concentrated in the top 50 meters, swimming through the bloom with filtering baskets open, growing heavier with each hour. Before dawn they descend. They sink below the dangerous illuminated zone and spend the daylight hours at depth, digesting the night's meal. This daily commute covers vertical distances of 1 to 200 meters each way, 400 meters of travel daily, and it serves multiple purposes beyond just avoiding predators. It also mixes the ocean. When krill swim upward, they push water ahead of them, creating tiny currents. When billions of krill do this simultaneously, those tiny currents sum into something measurable, a collective force that helps mix nutrient-rich deep water with the sunlit surface layers, fertilizing the phytoplankton that the krill will eat the next night. Larval krill migrate even deeper. Young fossilia have been tracked, descending to 400 meters during the day, twice the depth of adults, perhaps because they're more vulnerable to predators, or because they benefit from spending more time in the nutrient-rich deep layers. Their longer migrations may contribute disproportionately to ocean mixing and to the carbon flux we'll discuss shortly. Not all migrations follow the simple up-at-night, down-at-day pattern. Some krill populations form dense surface swarms during daylight hours, despite the risk, likely for reproductive purposes, or because they're feeding on particularly rich phytoplankton blooms that they don't want to abandon. These daylight swarms make krill incredibly vulnerable to predators, especially birds and surface-feeding seals, but the benefit of continuous feeding on abundant food apparently outweighs the danger. Other populations skip migration entirely during winter, when there's little food at the surface anyway and energy conservation becomes paramount. They remain at depth, inactive, waiting for spring. The triggers for migration are complex and not fully understood. Light level is clearly important, but krill also respond to food concentration, to predator cues, to internal biological clocks. They can detect chemical signals indicating the presence of phytoplankton blooms above them or predators nearby. They can sense the collective movement of their swarmmates and adjust their own behavior accordingly. They're not blindly following a programmed response, but making decisions, processing information, choosing where to swim based on competing priorities of feeding, safety, and energy conservation. And they do all of this while living in swarms. A swarm of Antarctic krill is difficult to comprehend until you've seen one. Imagine swimming in dark Antarctic water, visibility limited to a few meters by the plankton and particles suspended in the sea. Then suddenly, emerging from the murk ahead, a cloud, a living cloud, thousands upon thousands of krill suspended in the water column, packed together with barely any space between bodies, extending forward and up and down beyond the limits of visibility. Each individual krill is swimming, thoracopods beating, body undulating, maintaining its position relative to its neighbors through constant motion. The water itself seems pink from their semi-transparent shells tinted by the pigments in their bodies. You swim into the swarm and it envelops you. Krill surround you on all sides, above and below, thousands of small bodies flowing past like living current. If you hold still, they simply swim around you, each one adjusting its path to avoid collision, the swarm flowing around obstacles like water around a stone. If you reach out, they dart away in explosive bursts, backward rockets propelled by rapid flicks of their tails, but within seconds they've returned to position, the gap you created in the swarm filled in as if it never existed. From above, looking down through clear water, swarms appear as dark irregular patches against the paler background, shadows cast by accumulated bodies blocking light. From below, looking up toward the surface, swarms become silhouettes, a ceiling of small shapes backlit by sunlight filtered through ice or open water. From the side, swarms can stretch to the horizon, vast aggregations longer than a human can perceive, kilometers of krill extending in all directions. The density inside a swarm varies. At the edges, krill space themselves several body lengths apart, perhaps 10 individuals per cubic meter of water. Deeper into the swarm, density increases. The core might hold 100 krill per cubic meter, or 1,000, or in the tightest aggregations, 10,000 to 30,000 individuals per cubic meter. At those densities, every krill is swimming within centimeters of a dozen neighbors, constantly adjusting position to avoid collision while remaining part of the coordinated whole. Swarms can be small, just a few cubic meters, a handful of individuals schooling together, or they can be enormous. The largest recorded swarm covered an area of 450 square kilometers, roughly 170 square miles, extending to depths of 200 meters. This single swarm was estimated to contain over 2 million tons of krill. 2 million tons. That's the equivalent biomass of about 30 million human beings, approximately the entire population of Canada, all compressed into a patch of ocean visible from satellites in Earth orbit. Yes, from space. The largest krill swarms show up on satellite imagery as reddish-brown stains on the ocean surface, discoloring the water from the sheer concentration of pink-shelled bodies. Observers on ships sometimes describe the ocean turning pink for miles in every direction during encounters with massive swarms. Seabirds flock to these aggregations. Seals patrol the edges. Whales arrive to lunge feed, opening mouths the size of garage doors to engulf thousands of krill in a single gulp. But why swarm? What advantage is there in gathering together so densely? The most obvious answer is predator confusion. A single krill drifting alone is easy prey for any fish or squid or seal that happens upon it. But a krill embedded in a swarm of thousands becomes much harder to target. Predators that hunt by sight find it difficult to focus on one individual when countless similar bodies swim in every direction. The swarm moves as a shimmering whole, and singling out any particular krill becomes nearly impossible. Some individuals will be caught, of course, but the majority survive each attack, and those losses spread across thousands mean each individual krill's chance of being the one eaten drops to near zero. Swarming also allows krill to exploit patchy food resources more efficiently. Phytoplankton blooms don't spread evenly across the ocean. They form in irregular patches where nutrients and light and water conditions align, sometimes tens of kilometers across, sometimes just a few hundred meters. By staying in swarms, krill can quickly locate and exploit these patches when they drift into them, then remain in place feeding until the patch is consumed or disperses. A solitary krill might swim through empty water for days before encountering food. A swarm increases the odds that at least some members will encounter a bloom, and once they do, the whole group benefits. There may be reproductive advantages as well. Finding a mate in the vast Southern Ocean could be challenging for a solitary animal, but within a swarm, males and females are already gathered together, and spawning can occur with minimal search time. Pheromones and behavioral displays that work over distances of meters become useful when potential mates are constantly nearby. Recent research has revealed that krill swarms are far more sophisticated than anyone realized. These aren't random aggregations of animals simply attracted to the same location. They're coordinated groups where individuals adjust their swimming based on complex interactions with their neighbors, following rules that produce emergent collective behavior. Scientists studying krill in special aquariums have tracked individuals in 3 dimensions, mapping their positions and velocities frame by frame as they swim together in groups. These studies reveal that krill maintain specific spacing relative to their neighbors, adjusting both speed and direction based on where nearby individuals are located. When a neighbor swims ahead, a krill will speed up to maintain distance. When a neighbor cuts in front, it will slow down or turn to avoid collision. But here's what makes krill unique. They pay more attention to neighbors in the vertical plane than to those swimming beside them horizontally. Most fish schools and bird flocks organize primarily in 2 dimensions, with individuals responding strongly to neighbors on either side or ahead, but relatively little to those above or below. Krill do the opposite. They coordinate most strongly with neighbors above and below them, aligning their swimming to maintain vertical spacing while being more relaxed about horizontal positions. This vertical focus may relate to the hydrodynamics of swimming. As a krill swims forward, it pushes water downward and backward, creating a flow field that affects nearby individuals. Krill swimming above create downward flows that could push others deeper, while those below create upward flows. By carefully maintaining vertical spacing and adjusting their responses to neighbors above or below, krill might be managing these hydrodynamic interactions, staying in favorable flow positions while avoiding interference. Or it might relate to predator avoidance. Most krill predators attack from above or below, diving penguins plunging down into the swarm or seals rising from beneath. By maintaining strong awareness of vertical positions, krill might be optimizing their ability to respond to attacks from these directions. A predator approaching from above creates a shadow, a dimming of light, and krill can detect this and flee downward. A predator from below blocks light from beneath, and krill flee upward. Vertical organization might maximize the swarm's ability to detect and respond to these threats. Communication also plays a role in vertical spacing. Krill have bioluminescent organs positioned on their undersides, photophores that emit yellow-green flashes of light for 2 to 3 seconds at a time. These organs are complex, with concave reflectors behind them and lenses in front, allowing krill to direct the light where they want it to go, even rotate the whole organ using muscles to change the direction of the beam. The positioning on the underside means these signals are most visible to other krill swimming below, creating a communication channel in the vertical plane. What are they communicating? Nobody knows for certain. The flashes might serve as counter-illumination, matching the downwelling light from above to make the krill's silhouette less visible to predators attacking from below. The silhouette of any object seen against bright sky or surface water makes it stand out. By emitting light from their undersides, krill might be blurring their outline, camouflaging themselves against the background glow. Some deep-sea fish use exactly this strategy with their bioluminescence, or the flashes might be social signals, messages between krill about position or reproductive state or alarm. The fact that the organs can be rotated suggests directional communication, one krill signaling to another specific individual rather than broadcasting to the whole swarm. The timing of flashes might encode information, a simple language of light pulses carrying meaning we can't yet decipher. When disturbed, when a predator strikes or a hand reaches into the aquarium, or a sudden shadow falls across the swarm, krill exhibit their escape reaction, a behavior called lobstering. They flip their tails, fold their bodies into a tight C-shape, and shoot backward through the water at explosive speeds, reaching more than 0.5 meters per second. That's faster than most humans can sprint relative to body length, and they achieve it in a fraction of a second. The trigger time for this response is just 55 milliseconds from stimulus to motion, remarkable given the cold temperatures that slow most biological reactions. During a lobstering event, krill in the immediate vicinity of the disturbance scatter instantly, creating a hole in the swarm, empty space where bodies hung a moment before. But within seconds, that gap begins to close as krill swim back into position, re-establishing the spacing and coordination that define the swarm. The disturbance ripples outward, krill at increasing distances responding to the motion of their neighbors rather than to the predator itself, a wave of reaction spreading through the group faster than any individual could swim. This is information transfer, social communication not through sound or light but through movement. A krill at one edge of the swarm detects a predator and flees. Its neighbors see it flee and respond accordingly. Even if they can't see the threat themselves, their neighbors respond to their motion, and so on, a cascading chain of reactions that allows the swarm to respond collectively to dangers that only a few individuals directly perceived. It's decentralized alarm system, with no leader or coordinator, just simple rules followed by millions of individuals that produce complex group behavior. Scientists are still working out the mathematics of krill swarming, building computer models that can replicate the patterns observed in real swarms. These models incorporate three main factors: attraction to neighbors that draws krill together, alignment with neighbors that coordinates their swimming direction, and repulsion from neighbors that prevents collisions. By adjusting the strength and range of each factor, models can produce swarms that look convincingly like the real thing, matching densities and spacing and responses to disturbances. But reality is more complicated than any model captures. Real krill respond to food gradients, swimming toward areas of higher phytoplankton concentration. They respond to light, moving up or down through the water column based on time of day and season. They respond to ice edges, to seafloor topography, to ocean currents and temperature boundaries. They respond to the presence of predators and the absence of food and the chemical signals released by other krill. All of these factors feed into their moment-by-moment decisions about where to swim, creating patterns that emerge from the interaction of simple individual behaviors with complex environmental inputs. The result is a living system, flexible and responsive, capable of flowing around obstacles and splitting into smaller groups and reforming again, capable of rising as a coordinated mass toward the surface or sinking into deeper water, capable of existing for weeks or months or longer as a coherent entity that maintains its structure even as individual krill come and go from its edges. And everywhere these swarms move, they shape the ocean around them. Antarctic krill are a keystone species, meaning their presence or absence fundamentally alters the entire ecosystem structure. Remove krill from the Southern Ocean, and the whole edifice collapses. Every food web depends on a foundation, some group of organisms that converts primary production into a form accessible to higher trophic levels. In many oceans, that foundation consists of multiple layers: tiny copepods eating phytoplankton, larger copepods eating smaller ones, small fish eating copepods. larger fish eating smaller fish. Energy passes up through many steps with losses at each transition. But in the Southern Ocean, krill bypass most of those intermediate steps. They feed directly on phytoplankton and themselves serve as food for animals at the top of the pyramid. Blue whales don't hunt fish, that hunt squid, that hunt small fish, that hunt copepods, that hunt phytoplankton. Blue whales hunt krill. It's a remarkably short food chain, just 2 steps from plant to the largest animal that has ever existed on Earth, and krill are the link that makes it possible. The list of Antarctic predators that depend on krill reads like a catalogue of the ocean's most iconic species. Baleen whales, blue whales, fin whales, humpback whales, minke whales, right whales, all of them feed primarily or exclusively on krill in Antarctic waters. They time their migrations to arrive when krill are most abundant, spending summer months gorging on swarms, packing on blubber that will sustain them through winter months in lower latitudes where food is scarcer. A blue whale can consume 4 to 6 tons of krill per day during the feeding season, engulfing whole swarms in lunge feeding attacks that see the whale accelerate toward the swarm with mouth agape, taking in thousands of krill and thousands of gallons of water in a single gulp, then filtering the water out through baleen plates while retaining the krill to swallow. Seals, crabita, seals, fur seals, leopard seals. Crabita seals are the most abundant seal species on Earth, with populations estimated at 10 to 15 million individuals, and 98% of their diet consists of krill. They've evolved specialized teeth specifically for this purpose, unusual multi-lobed teeth that act as a strainer, allowing them to sieve krill from water with remarkable efficiency. The exact mechanics remain unclear, how water passes through while krill are retained, but the adaptation is so effective that crabitas alone consume somewhere between 63 million and 75 million tons of krill each year. Leopard seals, though more famous for hunting penguins, also feed heavily on krill, perhaps 45% of their diet. Fur seals take krill opportunistically, especially during breeding season when they need easily accessible food near their colonies. Penguins, Adelie penguins, chinstrap penguins, gentoo penguins, macaroni penguins, all species breeding in Antarctic and subantarctic regions depend on krill to varying degrees. Adelie penguins in some regions feed almost exclusively on krill during chick-rearing season, making multiple foraging trips per day to catch krill and return to the colony to regurgitate meals for their young. Chinstrap penguin chicks that don't receive enough krill often fledge underweight and face higher mortality during their first winter at sea. The health of penguin colonies across the Southern Ocean correlates directly with local krill availability. Seabirds, albatrosses, petrels, prions, storm petrels. While many seabirds eat fish or squid, they also consume krill when swarms are accessible at the surface. Diving petrels plunge into the water to catch krill just below the surface. Prions skim across swarms with specialized bills that filter krill from the water. Even albatrosses, those long-distance travelers capable of soaring thousands of kilometers, will feed on krill when they encounter dense surface aggregations. Fish, Antarctic silverfish, icefish, lanternfish, and many other species. Not all Antarctic fish eat krill, but many do, either as juveniles or throughout their lives. These fish then become prey for larger predators, including toothed whales and leopard seals and emperor penguins, meaning even animals that don't eat krill directly often depend on animals that do. The energy captured by krill filters up through multiple pathways, spreading through the food web like water seeping into dry soil. Squid. Various species, including the glacial squid, which itself becomes important prey for sperm whales and elephant seals. Squid populations track krill abundance, their numbers rising and falling with the availability of their food source. The numbers are staggering. Seals collectively consume an estimated 63 to 130 million tons of krill annually. Whales take another 34 to 43 million tons. Seabirds 15 to 20 million tons. Squid 30 to 100 million tons. Fish another 10 to 20 million tons. Adding those ranges produces a total of somewhere between 152 and 313 million tons of krill consumed each year by Antarctic predators. Let that settle for a moment. Between 150 and 300 million metric tons. That's roughly half of the total estimated krill biomass, eaten and replaced every single year. Krill populations must reproduce and grow fast enough to replace these losses continuously, or the whole system unravels. And this is precisely what makes them a keystone species. Their abundance sustains everything above them in the food web, while their feeding sustains everything below, because krill don't just consume phytoplankton, they also fertilize it. When krill feed on phytoplankton, they extract nutrients and energy, incorporating carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus into their own tissues. But their digestion is inefficient. Much of what they consume passes through only partially processed, emerging as fecal pellets, compact cylinders of waste rich in organic matter and nitrogen and iron. These pellets are denser than seawater. They sink. A fecal pellet released by a krill at the surface will descend through the water column at rates of 50 to 200 meters per day, faster than most organic particles, fast enough to reach depths of several hundred meters within days. At those depths, the carbon and nutrients contained in the pellet enter a different realm, the ocean's interior, where water is isolated from the atmosphere for decades or centuries as it circulates through the global thermohaline system. Carbon trapped there is effectively removed from the atmospheric cycle for timescales far longer than a human lifetime. This is the ocean's biological pump, the process by which carbon fixed at the surface through photosynthesis is transported to depth and sequestered away from the atmosphere. Phytoplankton pull carbon dioxide from the air and water, using sunlight to build sugars and cellular structures. When that phytoplankton is eaten and subsequently expelled as fecal pellets or dyes and sinks as marine snow, the carbon goes down into the depths. It accumulates on the seafloor. It becomes incorporated into sediments. It is buried over geological timescales, eventually forming rocks, compressed and locked away. Krill are major drivers of this process in the Southern Ocean. Their inefficient digestion means their fecal pellets contain more carbon than those of many other zooplankton. Their large size means each pellet is heavier and sinks faster, reaching greater depths before decomposing. Their enormous abundance means they produce fecal pellets in quantities that dwarf the output of other species, and their vertical migrations mean they often release these pellets at depth after descending from surface feeding sessions, giving the pellets a head start on their journey down. But that's not all. Krill also molt, shedding their exoskeletons every few weeks during the growth season. The cast-off exoskeleton, called an exuvia, is a complete shell, a ghost krill that drifts empty in the water. These exuvia are also denser than seawater. They also sink, and they carry carbon with them, chitin and proteins and lipids that were once part of the living krill, now descending as another form of export flux. An adult krill might molt 20 to 30 times per year when food is abundant and growth is rapid. That's 20 to 30 exoskeletons sinking into the depths annually from each individual. Multiply that by 300 trillion krill and you start to glimpse the scale. Researchers have calculated that the carbon flux from molting alone rivals the flux from fecal pellets in some areas during certain seasons, a contribution that went almost entirely unrecognized until recently. And when krill die, their bodies sink too. A dead krill, its muscles no longer swimming, its organs no longer functioning, becomes another parcel of carbon descending into the deep. Mortality is high enough that this death flux, though harder to measure than fecal pellets or exuvia, likely contributes significantly to the total carbon export in areas where krill are abundant. Adding these contributions together, fecal pellets and molts and carcasses, scientists now estimate that Antarctic krill remove approximately 12 billion tons of carbon from Earth's atmosphere each year through their role in the biological pump. 12 billion tons. Recent studies focusing specifically on carbon storage over long timescales suggest krill lock away at least 20 million metric tons of carbon annually in the deep ocean, carbon that will remain isolated from the atmosphere for a century or more. To put that in perspective, that's comparable to the carbon sequestration provided by salt marshes, mangroves and seagrass beds, those coastal ecosystems celebrated as blue carbon champions and increasingly protected for their climate benefits. Mangroves store about 24 million tons of carbon per year globally. Seagrasses store 44 million tons, salt marshes 13 million tons. Krill are in the same range, and they're a single species spread across a single ocean, not entire ecosystems spanning coastlines worldwide. The economic value of this service, calculated using carbon pricing mechanisms, ranges from 4 to 46 billion US dollars per year depending on which carbon price you use. That's the value of what krill do for the planet, simply by existing, by eating and excreting and molting and dying, by participating in ecological processes that sequester carbon and regulate climate. Some researchers argue krill should be protected not just for their ecological role in feeding penguins and whales, but explicitly as carbon storage organisms, critical infrastructure in the planet's climate regulation system. Marine protected areas could be designed around krill populations. Fishing restrictions could account for carbon impacts, not just predator impacts. Conservation policies could incorporate the carbon value of krill into cost-benefit analyses. But krill face challenges, and understanding those challenges requires understanding how they survive in one of Earth's most extreme environments. The Southern Ocean is brutally cold. Water temperatures hover between -1.3 and +3 degrees Celsius year-round, barely above the freezing point of seawater. Most organisms cannot function at such temperatures. Cell membranes become rigid, enzymes lose activity, ice crystals form in tissues, rupturing cells. Krill have adapted. Their cell membranes contain specialized lipids that remain fluid at low temperatures, preventing the membranes from freezing into solid sheets. Their enzymes are cold-adapted variants, able to catalyze reactions efficiently even when thermal energy is minimal. They produce antifreeze proteins in their blood, molecules that bind to ice crystals and prevent them from growing, allowing krill to survive in water cold enough that ice forms around them. But even with these adaptations, krill cannot survive if ice crystals form inside their bodies. They must avoid supercooled water, areas where temperature drops below the freezing point, but ice hasn't nucleated yet. Contact with supercooled water can trigger instant freezing, ice spreading through tissues faster than antifreeze proteins can stop it. Krill avoid the coldest layers, staying in water just warm enough to remain liquid, a narrow temperature band that shifts with seasons and currents. Sea ice is both opportunity and threat. On one hand, ice provides food, those algae lawns on the underside that sustain larvae through winter and give adults a backup food source when phytoplankton is scarce. Ice also provides shelter from predators, the complex structure of pressure ridges and leads creating a three-dimensional habitat where krill can hide from seals and whales. On the other hand, ice represents danger. If ice forms around krill too quickly, they can become trapped, frozen into the matrix, their bodies preserved until the ice melts months later. Larvae seeking algae on ice undersides sometimes find themselves in brine channels, those pockets and tubes inside the ice, and if temperatures drop further, those channels freeze solid, entombing the larvae. Climate change is altering the relationship between krill and ice. In the Antarctic Peninsula region, where the majority of krill research and fishing occurs, air temperatures have increased by 2.5 degrees Celsius over the last 50 years, far faster than the global average. This warming has reduced winter sea ice extent and duration dramatically. Areas that once froze solid every winter now experience patchy ice or no ice at all in some years. For larval krill, this is catastrophic. Without ice, there's no algae lawn to graze during winter. Larvae that reach the surface in autumn find only empty water, no food, and they starve. Recruitment, the addition of new juveniles to the adult population, drops sharply in years when ice is limited. Multiple poor recruitment years in sequence lead to population declines, fewer adult krill surviving to spawn, fewer larvae produced, a downward spiral. Long-term studies tracking krill abundance in the Antarctic Peninsula region show significant declines since the 1970s, drops of 30 to 40% or more in some areas. These declines correlate strongly with reduced sea ice, suggesting that warming is already impacting krill populations in this critical region. Other predators that depend on krill, particularly penguins, show corresponding population declines. Adelie penguin colonies near the Antarctic Peninsula have shrunk dramatically as krill become scarcer and birds must travel farther to find food or switch to less nutritious alternatives. However, the picture is complicated. Not all areas show krill declines. In some parts of the Southern Ocean, krill populations appear stable or even increasing. The Antarctic Peninsula is warming fastest, but regions farther east, around East Antarctica and the Weddell Sea, are less affected. Krill populations there may be healthier, though they're also less studied. Moreover, warming affects different life stages differently. Adult krill can shrink and survive lean periods. Larvae cannot. Adults can switch between ice algae and open water phytoplankton. Larvae are more dependent on ice. If warming primarily reduces ice but increases open water phytoplankton, blooms by lengthening the productive season, adults might benefit even as larvae suffer, leading to complex population dynamics that are hard to predict. Climate change also brings acidification. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and as CO2 levels rise, seawater becomes more acidic, its pH dropping incrementally year by year. This affects shell-building organisms, including krill, which construct their exoskeletons from chitin reinforced with calcium carbonate. More acidic water makes it harder to form calcium carbonate structures, potentially weakening shells or requiring krill to expend more energy on skeleton production. Studies on krill embryos exposed to higher CO2 concentrations show developmental abnormalities, suggesting that acidification could impact reproduction and early life stages. But adult krill seem less affected, at least in short-term experiments, their shells remaining intact even in water with elevated CO2. Long-term effects remain uncertain, one more variable in an increasingly complex equation. And then there's fishing. Krill have been harvested commercially since the late 1960s. Japan and the Soviet Union pioneered large-scale krill fishing, sending factory ships south to Antarctic waters to catch and process krill at sea. The fishery peaked in the early 1980s with annual catches exceeding 500,000 tons, mostly taken by Soviet vessels. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the fishery declined sharply, dropping to around 100,000 tons per year through the 1990s and early 2000s. But in recent years, the krill fishery has expanded again. New technologies make catching and processing krill more efficient. New markets have emerged, particularly for krill oil, marketed as a premium omega-3 supplement superior to fish oil. Krill meal is increasingly used in aquaculture, feeding farmed salmon and shrimp, and demand from these industries grows as aquaculture expands worldwide. Annual catches have climbed back toward 300,000 tons, and the fleet continues to modernize and expand. The fishery operates primarily in the Atlantic sector, near the Antarctic Peninsula, and around South Georgia, the same areas where krill are most abundant and most studied. Fishing vessels use large mid-water trawl nets to capture krill, targeting the densest swarms they can find, often guided by acoustic surveys that map krill concentrations using sonar. They process the catch on board, removing shells, freezing or cooking the krill, extracting oils and proteins, producing products that are shipped to markets around the world. Current catches represent less than 1% of the estimated total krill biomass, and the fishery is regulated by the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, KRILL, an international body that sets catch limits and monitors the fishery to prevent overharvesting. KRILL's precautionary approach means catch limits are set conservatively, well below what the krill population could theoretically sustain, to account for uncertainty and to protect krill-dependent predators like penguins and whales. But concerns remain. The fishery concentrates in areas that are also critical feeding grounds for predators, particularly near penguin colonies and whale feeding hotspots. When fishing vessels remove krill from these areas, they compete directly with wildlife for the same resource. A penguin swimming 20 kilometers to forage might find the swarm it was targeting has already been harvested, forcing the bird to continue searching, burning energy it can't afford to waste. Moreover, the fishery takes only adults, the largest and most valuable individuals. This selective harvesting could alter population structure, removing the most fecund females and potentially impacting reproduction. And fishing pressure is increasing in winter, when adult krill are more accessible because they descend to depths where trawl nets can reach them easily. But this also removes adults just before spawning season, precisely the individuals needed to maintain recruitment. Scientists advocating for stronger protections argue that fishing should be prohibited near known predator feeding areas, particularly during breeding seasons when penguins and seals need reliable access to krill to feed their young. They argue for mandatory ecosystem monitoring, tracking penguin populations and whale numbers and krill recruitment, so fishing can be adjusted if populations decline. They argue that the carbon sequestration value of krill should be incorporated into management decisions, recognizing that removing krill from the ocean also removes their contribution to carbon storage. Others point out that even with recent increases, the fishery remains tiny compared to other major fisheries worldwide, and that CCAMLR's precautionary approach already accounts for ecosystem needs. The debate continues, scientific papers and management proposals circulating through working groups and international meetings, while fishing vessels continue to operate and krill populations continue to fluctuate with climate patterns that nobody fully understands. Beyond Antarctica, krill populate every ocean, each species adapted to its particular environment, each playing a similar but distinct role in local food webs. Northern krill, Meganxiphanes norvegica, thrives in the North Atlantic, ranging from the Mediterranean north to Arctic waters, feeding on diatoms and copepods, supporting populations of fish and whales. Pacific krill, Eupausia pacifica, dominates the North Pacific, forming swarms along the coasts of California and British Columbia and Japan, migrating vertically through hundreds of meters daily, sustaining salmon and seabirds and humpback whales. Tropical species tend to be smaller, less abundant, less visible, but still important. They form smaller swarms in warmer waters, completing shorter life cycles, reproducing more frequently, occupying ecological niches that colder water species cannot exploit. Some live in surface waters permanently, others inhabit the mesopelagic zone, that dim twilight layer between 200 and 1,000 meters deep, rising at night to feed on phytoplankton and descending to deep refuges during the day. One species lives even deeper. Dendrobausia amblyopsis, the bathypelagic krill, inhabits waters below 1,000 meters, down to depths of 4,000 meters or more in some regions, the only krill species found in the deep sea. It's also the only krill species that doesn't bioluminesce, having lost those light organs in the perpetual darkness where they provide no advantage. It's larger than most surface krill, reaching 14 centimeters, and it feeds on detritus and small prey rather than filtering phytoplankton. It's strange, primitive, poorly studied, a reminder that even within a single order of crustaceans there exists remarkable diversity. In the Indian Ocean, krill species overlap and partition resources. Some prefer coastal waters, others open ocean. Some live near the surface, others at depth. Temperature and salinity and food availability all influence which species thrive in which areas, creating a mosaic of different krill communities across different water masses. Pacific krill around Japan support important commercial fisheries, with catches used primarily for human consumption. Fresh krill being prized in Japanese cuisine. Northern krill have been harvested sporadically in the Atlantic, though the fishery never reached the scale of the Antarctic fishery. The diversity of uses mirrors the diversity of species, each ocean hosting different relationships between krill and the human societies that border those waters. But no matter the ocean, no matter the species, krill share fundamental characteristics. They are small crustaceans that feed on plankton and form swarms and serve as prey for larger animals. They molt and bioluminesce and migrate vertically. They link the ocean's primary production to its apex predators. They are, in every ocean, essential threads woven through food webs, and pulling on those threads creates consequences that ripple outward in ways not always predictable. Recent research reveals layers of complexity in krill behavior that earlier scientists never suspected. The swarming algorithms, the vertical communication, the response to chemical cues all point toward cognitive sophistication unexpected in such small animals. Krill can smell food from distances of hundreds of meters, detecting phytoplankton blooms and swimming toward them against currents. They can smell predators too. Penguin guano or seal scent triggering avoidance behaviors, tighter swimming patterns, reduced feeding activity. They can learn, at least in simple ways. Krill exposed repeatedly to harmless stimuli eventually stop responding, habituating to the false alarms. Krill exposed to predator odors in the presence of actual predators learn to associate those odors with danger, responding more strongly to the odors in future encounters, even without the predator present. They make decisions. When presented with a choice between two food patches of different quality, krill preferentially swim toward the richer patch, assessing and comparing options before committing to a direction. When faced with competing demands, feeding versus avoiding predators, they adjust their behavior based on hunger levels, taking more risks when nutritionally stressed and staying safer when well fed. These are not the actions of simple reflexive automatons. These are the behaviors of organisms processing information from their environment, integrating multiple sensory inputs, weighing options, and acting in ways that optimize survival and reproduction. The nervous system of a krill is tiny, a nerve cord running the length of the body with ganglia forming simple processing centers, nothing resembling a brain in the vertebrate sense. And yet it's sufficient for these tasks, sufficient to navigate the complexities of ocean life, sufficient to coordinate with millions of swarmmates while avoiding predators and finding food and eventually reproducing. There are mysteries still. Nobody knows exactly how krill navigate during their vertical migrations, what cues they use to know when to swim up or down, how they maintain depth and darkness where pressure is the only reliable signal. Nobody knows how swarms form initially, what causes krill to begin aggregating rather than swimming alone, what threshold of density or neighbor proximity triggers the transition from solitary to social. Nobody knows how information about food or predators spreads through swarms so quickly, whether it's visual observation of neighbors or chemical signals or hydrodynamic cues. Nobody knows what it's like to be a krill. Thomas Nagel asked what it's like to be a bat, using echolocation to perceive the world through sound. We might equally ask what it's like to be a krill, drifting in cold currents, surrounded by millions of your kind, sensing the flow patterns created by their swimming, detecting the bioluminescent flashes from below, feeling the pressure changes that signal a predator's approach. What is subjective experience at that scale, with that sensory apparatus, in that environment? Is there any flicker of awareness, or merely stimulus and response, electrochemical cascades following programmed pathways? We don't know. We can't know, perhaps, but we can observe and measure and slowly piece together understanding of these animals that remain, despite decades of study, profoundly alien to us. And so we come back, as the night deepens and your breathing slows further still, to the simple facts. Krill are small crustaceans that live in oceans around the world. They feed on phytoplankton, filtering microscopic plants from water using delicate basketworks of bristles. They form swarms that can number in the trillions, coordinated clouds of life visible from space, shimmering aggregations that move as one through dark seas. They migrate vertically, rising at night to feed, descending at dawn to rest. They bioluminesce, flashing yellow-green signals into the water below them. They molt and shrink and grow again. They spawn in summer, releasing eggs that sink into the abyss before hatching and swimming back toward light. They feed the ocean's giants. Whales and seals and penguins depend on them utterly. Without krill, the Antarctic ecosystem would collapse, the food web unraveling from the middle, leaving top predators with nothing to eat and phytoplankton blooms to drift unconsumed. With krill, the system functions, energy flowing upward from plant to animal, supporting the most productive waters on Earth. They store carbon, pumping it into the deep sea through their waste and molts and eventual death, sequestering billions of tons annually, providing climate services whose value is only beginning to be recognized. They mix the ocean, billions of tiny bodies ascending and descending daily, moving water and nutrients between surface and depth, stirring the layers that would otherwise stratify. They face uncertainty. Climate change alters their habitat, reducing the sea ice that larvae need, warming water in ways we can't fully predict, acidifying the ocean and changing the chemistry of shell formation. Fishing removes adults from critical areas, competing with predators, potentially impacting populations we don't yet understand well enough to manage with confidence. The future is unclear, but for now, tonight they persist. Right now, even as you rest here, 300 trillion krill are swimming through Antarctic waters. Some are feeding near the surface, filtering phytoplankton under midnight sun or winter darkness, depending on season and location. Some are descending toward depth, digesting meals, excreting pellets that spiral down into the abyss. Some are swarming in clouds kilometers long, coordinating their movements through signals we barely understand. Some are larvae clinging to ice undersides, scraping algae with bristled legs, growing slowly through the long dark months. Some are spawning, males and females embracing briefly before separating, eggs sinking away into the depths to begin the cycle again. They persist. Tiny drifters in the immense ocean, fragile yet resilient, simple yet sophisticated, individually insignificant yet collectively essential. They are the pink tide, the whale food, the carbon stores, the keystone species, the foundation. They are krill. and the ocean would not be the same without them. The sea is vast and dark and cold, but it is full of life, and much of that life depends on these small, translucent animals that most people will never see, never touch, never think about. Yet they are there, drifting in their billions, feeding and fleeing and spawning and sinking, woven into every thread of the Antarctic food web, and into the carbon cycle, and into the deep structure of how ocean ecosystems function. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can think of them if you wish, or you can simply let them go. One more gentle story dissolving into the darkness behind your closed eyes. You've traveled with them through their life cycle, from egg falling into the abyss to larva swimming toward light, from juvenile grazing beneath ice to adult coordinating with the swarm. You've learned something of their world, the pressures they face, the roles they fill, the mysteries that remain. And now you can rest, knowing that somewhere far to the south, in waters you will likely never swim, beneath ice you will likely never touch, those krill continue their ancient patterns. Feeding, swimming, surviving, thriving, building the foundation on which so much else depends. The ocean's tiny drifters, the pink clouds beneath the ice, the living connection between microscopic plants and massive whales. The krill, may your dreams be peaceful, your sleep deep and restorative, your tomorrow bright. Thank you for spending this time with the krill, and with me here at Deep Sleep Seas. Good night.